Hello and welcome to Spyhards podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, will the pawns come out, please?
I've been waiting for you to say that. I have already dressed as a pawn.
And I am the king.
I figured you would be that way. I was going to be your queen, but I don't know how you'd look after me particularly.
You're very high maintenance.
I am. I absolutely am. But I think we've got a very interesting chat for you this week. We're going back to the world of the man from U.N.C.L.E, and we have a very special guest joining us. So without further ado, Cam, let's open up Channel D and get to the review. Okay, folks, before we get to this week's film, we need to introduce this week's guest. Joining us as we take a step into Del Floria's tailor shop. You know, I looked up the meaning of the word lexicon earlier today, and it said the vocabulary of a person, language, or branch of knowledge. And frankly, I can't think of many people that are a fountain of knowledge more than our guest this week, making his, I think, third or fourth visit to Spyhards podcast, Mr. Alan J. Porter. Hello, sir. How are you?
I am good, and thank you for having me back, which I think is the third time, yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you just made like a pop-in visit at some point, or like a note, like a quick note or something. I wasn't sure, but yeah.
I don't know. Does getting together in the pub in London count? In that case,
it might.
In that case, it's 4. Yeah. Okay.
There you go. Yeah. Now, your backstory, for those who haven't caught the episodes in the past, Alan, you've got a footing in spy media, spy franchises, movies, films, television shows. We've spoken about in the past where your love of spy movies comes from, I should say. And we'll cue up the film in a second. But, I didn't really mention the books that you've written. You do a lot of writing. Just tell the audience, what is it you do with spy stuff yourself? What have you published?
Well, thank you. Check is in the mail for giving me the prompt there. I've written a few books, mainly around our good friend James Bond, 007, a book on the history of James Bond in comics. I've also written numerous articles on Bond in comics. And as you mentioned, Lexicon, the James Bond Lexicon, which is an encyclopedia of the fictional worlds of James Bond. It's an A to Z of 5,000 different entries of everything that you want to know about the fictional worlds of James Bond. So you won't find an entry for Sean Connery or Roger Moore, but if you want to know the name of James Bond's interior decorator or who services his Bentley, you'll find it in the book. So, it's a labor of love, as we say. And I'm also a member of the Ian Foundation, where we rescue and restore James Bond movie vehicles, which then go on to be in things like the current Bond in Motion exhibit in Washington, D.C. and the Science of Bond exhibit in Chicago currently.
What were some of the vehicles that you've helped, bring back through that project that maybe stand out to you?
Well, my absolute personal one is the Caterpillar excavator from Skyfall, from the train sequence at the beginning, because when that movie came out, I was actually working at Caterpillar, and I made it my goal in life to get that machine for the Foundation, which we eventually did, probably a few years after I'd actually left Caterpillar, but through those connections, we tracked it down, found it, and it is now in our collection. Yes. So.
Wow.
There you go.
I went to the Bond in Motion exhibit in Los Angeles. They didn't have that one, but It's just an incredible experience to see those vehicles.
The one in the Peterson Museum in LA was great. We were lucky enough. I was lucky enough to go twice. Once with the Bond podcast I do. I should have mentioned that. The On Her Majesty's secret podcast network, where we do numerous shows, and we got the place to ourselves for 3 hours and did a live podcast.
Oh, cool.
From there. And then the Ian Foundation had its 30th anniversary party at the museum later the same year. So I got to see it twice. I think we had about 19 or 20 of the vehicles in there were from the Foundation collection.
We've had a couple of the Ian Fleming Foundation members on in the past. Some of the names are escaping me, but I just for association now, I like to pretend that we're honorary members.
Of course.
Yeah, our license to kill is in the post, I'm sure.
Yeah, so.
But, spinning off from Bond, Cam, why don't you cue us up about what we're talking about this week?
Yes, we are tackling 1966's One Spy Too Many, the third Man from U.N.C.L.E. theatrical feature.
I've got a lot to say about this film. I'm sure we all do. But I think, we've sort of proved your James Bond credentials. You're part of the Ian Fleming Foundation, Alan. But Man from U.N.C.L.E, that's a whole adjacent spy, franchise in itself, a big one in the 60s, and it's had its revivals since. Where did the Man from U.N.C.L.E love start for you?
Probably when it was originally shown on British TV when I was a kid. I just absolutely loved the show. I've always loved spy stuff, and it stayed with me. And it's probably my second, not probably, it is. It's my second favorite spy franchise. For me, it's Bond, U.N.C.L.E, and then Mission Impossible, the top three. I've just always loved it as a kid. Used to love the U.N.C.L.E annuals and reading the U.N.C.L.E strips in the old TV Tornado and stuff and all that growing up. It's just been a constant part of my my pop culture life. When they did the original box set in a briefcase DVD collection, rushed out and spent a ridiculous amount of money on that, and actually been introducing it on our Bond podcast series. On one of the shows that we do there, we've actually also started reviewing the TV shows episodes one by one and introducing the gang there who'd never actually seen it before to Man from U.N.C.L.E. So
well, I mean, there you go, folks. We're only talking about the movie adaptations of them in a sense, or what they were presenting the episodes as movies, because we only talk about spy movies. If you want the episode breakdown, you now know where to go.
Check out the Rogue Agents show on Majesty's Secret Podcast Network.
What has been sort of your experience showing these episodes to those to your co-hosts?
They love it. They have gone into it full. Particularly, we only do it probably once every 5 to 6 episodes. We do an U.N.C.L.E one because everybody gets their turn of what they want to talk about. So we're probably only about 5 or 6 episodes in, but they have been absolutely blown away by it. They absolutely love it, and just can't get over how cool Napoleon Solo is.
Right? That's been my experience as well. Robert Vaughn, I'd seen him in many things over the years, Superman 3, Towering Inferno, lots of movies, but Robert Vaughn on Man from U.N.C.L.E is next level. He's incredible. Yeah. And that first season is so strong. I've just kicked off season 2 myself for a first time watch, and I can see the tone changing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, season 1, the black and white episodes, a whole of season 1 is my favorite.
I like the Napoleon Solo love we've got going on here, but I'm an Ilya guy, I have to say. I just like the slightly quirky outsider thing he's got going on. That's more my energy.
You're not a Robert Vaughn.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue on that either. David McCallum really did take over the show later on, and I think he's a very cool cat, as the hip kids used to say. So.
Well, there's something I want to talk about later when it comes to 60s pop culture franchises and things this reminds me of quite a lot, which I think I'll bring us back to. But let's talk about One Spy Too Many, our third U.N.C.L.E film. The first 2 films were taken from episodes in the first season. This is the first time they're using a second season. I think it's these first 2 episodes of season 2, Cam?
Yeah, it's the season opening 2-parter, yeah. Okay,
so One Spy Too Many. Watch out, brothers. Here comes U.N.C.L.E again.
Brothers? They really had a very specific audience they were aiming this thing at.
It certainly was. It's a family affair here on Spyhards. The men from U.N.C.L.E are back. This time, Robert Vaughn and David McCallum must stop the megalomaniacal Alexander from committing the world's greatest crimes. That's it.
Yeah, that sums up. It's so weird, though, that they were just they were cutting off any female audience with this. They were just no, brothers only are allowed to watch this movie.
It's like the Yorkie bar of spy movies, which is a reference only British people will get.
But it is weird because, McCallum and I guess to a certain degree Robert Vaughn were a little bit of heartthrobs around this time period for the show. You'd think they'd want to aim this as wide as they could.
Yeah, a little bit. They were huge heartthrobs. I mean, they were almost Beatles level, especially McCallum towards second.
Floppy hair. It's what it's all about.
Yeah. I mean, he would get mobbed and screaming crowds at the airport and stuff like that. So.
And that was just you, Alan.
Yeah. I've lost the floppy hair though.
We all have. We all
Yeah,
have. Don't
yeah.
worry. Well, I suppose opening up the conversation on the film and prior connections to it, Cam is doing his first time watch. You've got no background with this film, I would imagine, Cam.
No, I just watched the two-parter like a couple days earlier. Yeah.
Okay. And this is all a fresh watch for me, so I've no backstory with this film. But Alan, I'm sort of keen to hear from you because you have a unique experience here because you were in the UK when this was all coming out, so you got to sort of see the film releases as well as the TV show running concurrently. Do you have any prior connection to One Spy Too Many?
I remember going to see the movies, but I can't say they particularly. This is not one that particularly sticks in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
The first one's Trap a Spy does, and one of the later ones, The Helicopter Spies, I think was the title, sticks in my mind.
Yeah.
This one I probably did go to see, but I can't say I had any particular memory of it. So I did mention about, when they put the DVD set out many years ago, I got that. At the same time, Warner Brothers Archives did a DVD collection of all 8 movies.
That's what I've got. That's what I've been working from.
So
Same.
Yeah, so I watched that several years ago when I got it. But again, I can't say it stuck in my mind, which is interesting because the TV, certainly the first episode, is one of my favorite stories, but I'd sort of forgotten it made up a movie until I went to rewatch it for this. So what I did was I actually rewatched the movie, then sat down and rewatched the 2 TV episodes for this. So,
well, I have a question for you, Alan, because you saw some of these movies,
Yeah.
during their releases. Now, when we look at them now, we see them as TV episodes thrown on the big screen. Was there that sense of like knowingness at the time? Like, did they just feel like the novelties of seeing the show on the TV screen or on the movie screen, or did they feel like they were being movies, like you were walking out of theatrical films?
I mean, I was fairly young, but I think it did feel like it's a chance to go and watch Man from U.N.C.L.E. on the big screen. Not necessarily.
Sure.
And they had extra bits in them, which sort of made it a little bit more interesting. But the show was on British TV. It's not like when it was shown in some of the other countries where they showed them where it wasn't on TV at all at that point. This was like the precursor before. This was their first exposure to U.N.C.L.E. Or at least that's my memory. I'm sure somebody like Bill Koenig will probably tell me I'm wrong and I've got the release dates wrong. But I do have memories of seeing at least a couple of them. I don't think I saw all 8 in the movie theater, but I certainly remember seeing a few of them in the movie theater. But as I say, but the show was on TV anyway. I think the big thing was that we had a black and white. Even we had a black and white TV. The UK didn't get color until 68, 69. I don't think we got color in our house until the early 70s. So even if the shows were in color, we were seeing them in black and white. So going to see them on the big screen was a chance to see it in living glorious color. So yeah.
I suppose the question I had in my head, which was a great question from Cam, but spinning off from that a little bit, is, and if you don't remember, that's fine. I'm sorry for sort of probing you with these sort of contemporaneous questions.
No, it's good. It's making me think. Yeah.
But you probably would remember the pomp and circumstance of the Bond films coming out around about that time, because around about this point, you've got, this year was 66, so Thunderball.
The year after Thunderball, yeah.
Yeah.
So, did they have a similar pomp and circumstance to them, the Uncle films, or was it a lesser affair, which is not meant to be an Uncle joke?
No, that's perfect, Scott. Own that one.
Very good. I don't particularly remember. I think they were probably things like, and I think sometimes they were like a double bill, if I remember rightly. Yeah. So I think it would be just it's a Saturday double bill or whatever. I don't remember there being a lot of hype around it.
Okay. I doubt they were getting royal premieres and things like that. I don't think.
No, definitely not. No. And I'm actually trying to think back. Like I said, I used to read the comic strips that ran in, because they ran across a number of the weekly comics, different comics at that time. And I don't remember them like even putting ads in the comics that was like, coming soon to the big screen or anything like that. So.
Okay.
I wonder if it was a little bit like some years ago I saw the Star Trek Best of Both Worlds 2-parter on the big screen where they edited that one together, and it was remastered. It looked beautiful. And for those who don't watch Star Trek, it's the big Borg story, and you'll know probably what the Borg are. Yeah. And it was a fun experience, but we never mistook it for the latest installment in like the J.J. Abrams Star Trek franchise, which was like a big, expensive blockbuster deal.
Yeah, I mean they did it. I remember them like launching the Buck Rogers TV show by that being a feature before the show came out.
Yeah.
Battlestar Galactica did the same thing in the 80s.
Yeah, I remember they did. I think they edited some episodes of Jerry Anderson's UFO together and played those. I think mainly in Italy, but I remember some of those showing on at the local flea pit too.
There's a Mission Impossible one too from the TV show.
Yeah, so I think it was a fairly common practice
Mm.
at the time. Yeah.
And I know the episode you mean, Cam, obviously, but I have the film versions on Blu-ray of most of the Next Generation episodes, and much as you can say, hey, it's in 4K and it's been like edited together, it's still in 4:3.
Yeah.
Like you're still kind of trapped in that box. So even seeing it on a big screen, you're still going to feel that television.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am curious though. Let's get into the backstory of this film. Cam, how did we get so many spies?
Well, as I said, this was the expanded version of the season 2 premiere, the Alexander the Greater affair. This was actually the first episode, the part 1 of this, shown in color on television for those who had color sets. So that was a very exciting deal. And the episode aired September 1965. And this was a key point for the franchise because Sam Rolfe, the creator of the show, had overseen season 1 of Man from U.N.C.L.E, but he handed off the keys to the kingdom to David Victor, who was the producer on seasons 2 and 3. And so that maybe explains a little bit of the shift in tone you see between season 1 and 2. I'm curious, Scott, you watched the previous 2 films we did, which were taken from season 1. Did you notice a tone shift with this film versus the previous 2?
Well, I did. It will form some of my review, but I did personally think that they found their footing a little bit with this. I feel like the chemistry is more there, and I feel like, like people always say, if we're going to make a Next Generation reference, we'll go with that. It grew a beard in season 3, which is a very particular Star Trek reference, but in the sense of it found its footing, it became more comfortable within itself.
Yeah.
This feels like a very confident season opener. And they feel much more confident in both the 2 leads and also giving them more equal screen time.
Right, exactly, yeah, because Ilya was sort of drifting in and out in the previous 2 films, yeah.
Yeah, he was more in the second one. They were beginning to be like, oh, okay, people do like David McCallum, that's fine. But this one feels very much like you said, the men from U.N.C.L.E.
And notably, in that second film, they'd added a lot of Ilya footage because he wasn't as prominent in the TV episode.
And that, as Alan pointed out, is a reactionary thing. It was done later after the episodes are shot, and they're edited together at a much later point. So they were probably able to have seen the reaction that both characters got on television and been like, "Oh, let's put some more David McCallum in here."
Robert Vaughn was really thrilled with that, I'm sure.
I'm sure there's going to be some stories down the road of Robert Vaughn getting a bit uppity about this.
I can suspect so, yes.
Yeah, it feels very much like a Shatner Nimoy back and forth.
Yeah, for sure. And so the Alexander the Greater affair, and of course the basis for this film, was written by Dean Hargrove, who was a Kansas-born TV producer and writer who began his career in 1962 working on the Bob Newhart Show, which was a big deal in the early 60s, and then did some episodes of My Three Sons and Kraft Suspense Theater before starting off a run of 11 Man from U.N.C.L.E. episodes, beginning with season 1's The Never Never Affair, which co-starred Barbara Feldon, who we interviewed on Spyhards, and of course was a spy icon thanks to Get Smart. And that is a fantastic episode, very fun.
Oh, she was a great guest. One of my favorite interviews from last year. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the majority of Dean Hargrove's work was done in season 2 of U.N.C.L.E. His only outside of season 2 work, other than his season 1 intro and whatever, was a season 4 2-parter called The Prince of Darkness Affair, which became, cue it to what Alan said earlier, The Helicopter Spies.
There you go. And that's actually, The Helicopter Spies is one of the ones, whenever I post about us doing the U.N.C.L.E. films, it's one that gets mentioned to us.
Right.
People saying, oh, this is one of the good ones. So I'm very curious to see where that one goes, because you would often think, especially if it's a series that ends after 4 seasons, if it's towards the end, it's likely to be somewhere like, a season 3, the original series of Star Trek, that sort of thing, where the quality is slipping, let's say. But if one of the best movies is allegedly towards the end, who knows?
Exactly, yeah. And you had some pedigree from someone who was writing really good episodes in season 1 of the show. So, yeah, sky's the limit. And those helicopters, they can go very high in the sky.
Yeah, you get that one there. Well done, Cam.
Yeah. And so, like, the One Spy Too Many credit falls very early in Dean Hardgrove's career. But later on, he just became, like, a massive veteran of TV. He did an episode of Girl from U.N.C.L.E, but, like, he is someone who went on and worked on countless productions and did a lot of TV movies based on Perry Mason, McBride, and Jane Doe. Like, he did a ton of those TV movies. All of them are kind of procedural or courtroom stories. But a long, illustrious TV career.
I'm sure there'll be people listening that know the name, but for me, it doesn't really land. Alan, do you know anything of that person's work?
Not really. I mean, it was a name that's sort of familiar. See pop up on some of the U.N.C.L.E stuff, but nothing, desperate. So
yeah, it's like he's very big in the franchise world. So like Perry Mason, I know well. Like, I know what that is. But like Jane Doe is like a procedural series with Leah Thompson that there's been like a ton of TV movies. Who knew? And these are all in the 2000s.
Leah Thompson as in Back to the Future.
Yeah.
She did what?
Okay.
Yeah.
I've never heard of this. Jane Doe.
Yeah. Very popular, it seems. Who knew? Yeah.
Do Re Mi. There you go.
So, yeah. And the director of this quote-unquote film was Joseph Sargent, who I have a lot of time for. This guy, he was born in New Jersey and began acting in the early 50s. He had a bit part in From Here to Eternity, playing a soldier, and continued playing character parts through pretty much his entire career into the 2000s. Nothing that's going to jump out as like the iconic role, but just someone who consistently did bit parts. And he was also a pretty notable director. In 1959, he started off and helmed a teenager drama called Street Fighter, which, I'm sure it was a hysterical 1950s teenagers are out of control kind of movie. And I guess they were fighting in the streets.
I guess they were. I was just when you talk about teenage fighting, I just think of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and wanting. Is it Teenagers with Attitude? I think is the intro to that. It's
wasn't that like everything in the 90s? Ninja Turtles, all that. It was like these teenagers have attitude. Biker Mice from Mars, all that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, Biker Mice. Let's rock and ride.
So he does that sort of youth related film. And then
related film.
That's what I call it.
So old. These youth and their films.
That's the oldest thing I've ever said in my life. So he also started, putting his footprints in television and did 17 episodes of Lassie and worked on shows like Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Mr. Novak, and did 11 episodes of U.N.C.L.E, just like the writer. 11 episodes. That was like the number you wanted to do with U.N.C.L.E, and then you tap out and run out the door.
I wonder if it's just like the studio, like they have to pay you more at 12.
Yeah, maybe.
It's like an executive director or something like that. They have to add a title to him. So like, no, he's done 11. We don't want to pay him the bonus.
They're posting numbers on the walls like Alexander does in this movie.
You see the 11, you're like, oh, I'm done.
This is it.
I was actually just thinking. I was just thinking. I just watched Masters of the Air. I just wondered if it's like the combat missions. You get to
you
get to a
scratching it
certain
off.
number and you
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like by the end, they're as weathered as that one pilot in Masters of the Air who's just like, how have I continued to survive all these missions?
Yeah. So actually, I was wondering, did they sort of fade out partway through like season 3 when the tone drastically changed? And they were like, I don't want to go in that direction type thing, or?
Well, okay. So in the case of Sargent, most of his work was in the early season 1.
Okay.
He directed a lot of episodes early into season 1, but they stretched into season 3. His final work was the season 3 two-parter, The Concrete Overcoat Affair, which turned into the film The Spy in the Green Hat. And he was out after that. So he's really just there season 1 to 3.
Okay.
Yeah. But his other credits are pretty notable. He's someone who directed a lot of material, both TV and film. You wouldn't say Joseph Sargent was like, name carved in the walls of Hollywood as one of the great directors, but he had some like classic work. So he did the Star Trek episode, The Corbomite Maneuver.
Wow.
Which is one of the biggest Star Trek episodes of all time. And people may want to Google the name Balok, B-A-L-O-K, from Star Trek, and you'll be haunted forever. You're welcome.
And then you'll find out who played him, and you'll still be haunted.
That's right, yeah. But that is a classic Star Trek episode. He also directed The Taking of Pelham 123,
Wow.
a incredible movie. Walter Matthau, Robert Shaw, all-time
Great
suspense classic.
Mhm.
He did the Burt Reynolds film White Lightning, which falls into that Burt Reynolds real big star period. And he did Jaws the Revenge, which
Oh no.
we tackled on the Patreon, which, you know what? Say what you will about Jaws the Revenge. It's remembered.
It's remembered more than Jaws 3. I think Jaws 3 comes off as the worst of the four.
I think so, yeah. I think Jaws the Revenge has a certain resurgence, maybe because of the comedy world of people picking it to pieces.
Well, it's just very camp. It's just like, it's a pastiche of Jaws films in a sense. Like it's not purposefully, but it is.
It's the This Time It's Personal,
Yeah.
movie, which you can't go wrong with.
Oh, you could.
Yeah, well, yeah. And then he also did the Lonesome Dove spin-off miniseries, Streets of Laredo, which we watched in my house, and it was actually a big deal back in the day.
Yeah, that's cool.
Cam's on his own there.
Yeah, more or less.
He's alone on that street in Laredo.
Anyone? No? Okay. And a few other notes on this. There was a shift in the musical direction of the show. You may have noticed this.
Oh, boy.
So you had Jerry Goldsmith and Morton Stevens doing season 1. This is where Gerald Fried comes into play. And it is a very drastic shift into 60s like kind of pop music.
Play being the optimum word here. Because he's messing around.
With perfection, right? Like that Man from U.N.C.L.E. theme in season 1. I'm not going to lie, I was pissed off when I started season 2 and that music kicked in. I was like, this is not the U.N.C.L.E. music.
Take me back.
Yeah.
Well, you do know they change. I'm sorry, spoilers. They change it for each season.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll get it from you now. What are the power rankings of opening themes for Man from U.N.C.L.E.?
This is definitive.
Again, I'm going from memory here. I think season 1 and season 4 are the best. Season 4, they started to get things back on track. But yeah, they did mess around with it. And for me, I always come back to the first season.
Yeah, like that military march. Oh, it's a great.
Yeah. The Jerry Goldsmith version is the definitive one. Yeah.
You can't go wrong with old Goldsmith.
No,
he's just the man.
It's so weird to me to change like the musical identity of a show every season. Like,
especially with the stuff in this.
Well, it's the 60s. Like Bond has such a specific musical identity. Wouldn't you want to continue down that road? Like really brand your show based on its musical themes?
Well, I mean, just spitballing. We're not really getting into the film too much, but you talk about Jerry Goldsmith's sort of brassy theme. Maybe they were trying to get away from the brassy John Barry-ness of it all, and like, why don't we make it a bit more contemporary? Because brassy scores are actually quite old.
Yeah, I think they were again getting spoilers as the Batman TV show influence really starts to hit the series, and I think the music is also part of that, and away from John Barry and more towards Neil Hefti type stuff, So
I wonder if it was also just pursuing that like the kids.
Oh, here we go again.
Yeah, we're going for the youth vote.
Like making the music sound poppy, and like if they're heartthrobs, McCallum and Vaughn, then they want to play up more of the youth factor. And like this, to me, the score in this film sounds a lot almost like the 60s Disney films. It has that similar kind of poppiness you'd see in like the Kurt Russell Dexter trilogy.
Yeah.
So a few other notes. These quote-unquote films were expanded from their TV episodes. In this case, the Yvonne Craig footage is all new. That is not featured in the original story. They also added a new opening with David Sheiner, who's the goon, the bald goon. And that whole bit of him throwing grenades in slow-mo is not featured in the actual TV two-parter. And notably, both these actors had a history with U.N.C.L.E. Yvonne Craig appeared in the Brain Killer Affair from season 1, which also featured former Spyhards guest Nancy Kovac. That's a pretty strong episode.
Wow.
And then David Sheiner did multiple episodes of Man from U.N.C.L.E. And he first appeared in season 1 in the Yellow Scarf Affair and had 2 more appearances after this two-parter or film, whatever you want to call it. So the release of this film, kind of like the previous Uncles, it was not like a day and date across the world kind of affair. Using the word affair again.
We'll be doing that a lot.
I know. It was released in January 1966 in the UK and then kind of dispersed throughout the world, but didn't hit U.S. shores until December of that year. So it really was like the opposite ends of the year. It was the bookends. That is known as the year of U.N.C.L.E.
Much like the gas in the film, it was a slow distribution and made everyone happy.
That's right, yes. And the top 3 for the year. Number 1, The Bible, In the Beginning. Number 2, Hawaii, the epic starring Julie Andrews. I need to watch one of these days because we've brought it up on the show so many times. And number 3, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? And notably, this was actually the final Man from U.N.C.L.E. film released in theaters in the U.S.
That's interesting. I'll be keen to chart the fourth onwards to find out maybe why they stopped doing it. I would guess because it's on TV for free.
Well, I have no box office information on these movies because it just doesn't exist. But I have to imagine they were seeing dwindling results in North America.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, we've got some people lined up as guests for other episodes down the line who have potentially worked on some of these films. There's some insight we can draw there. But Alan, from your point of view, obviously you were in the UK at this point, so you were still getting the film releases. But did you ever? I mean, actually, I suppose I could take my question back because, as you said, on television it'd be in black and white. So at least there is this unique perspective of going to see it on the big screen in the UK because you're getting it in full color. I wonder if that's part of it too in North America.
Yeah, I just wondered in North America, whether they felt, just from a marketing point of view, that they didn't need to market the show to a wider audience anymore because it had, but because this is the second season, it's like, during the first season we're out trying to get people to watch the show. By the time it's the second season, it's already pretty much a top-rated show. We don't really need to be spending extra money to get people to come in and sit down and watch the show because it's already a smash hit. So
is that about the time when it really caught fire for U.N.C.L.E. in sort of season 2?
Yeah, well, as Cam said, 66 is the year of U.N.C.L.E. Yeah, so when it really was the hottest property around. Yeah.
I also wonder too, and you get to that mid-60s period in Hollywood, and it's a lot of very bloated, very expensive films. And Hawaii being one of them, but Sound of Music's in 65, and you're gonna have a lot of big musicals, Hello Dolly, and all this sort of thing. And it's like 2001 is gonna come out, in 1968, and it's just like that type of film experience. It's tough to put like an U.N.C.L.E. TV movie next to that, and it does seem like when we talk about a lot of these TV films that wound up on the big screen, the Mission Impossible one you cited earlier, Scott, as well, they all fall around that 65 period. It's like the spy craze, and it's more of like a cash grab kind of thing. But at a certain point, people are going to look at what's playing in the theaters next to, the Man from U.N.C.L.E. or the Mission Impossible theaters and go like, these aren't movies.
That was where some of the original critics of television sort of came from. That was their angle, is that you couldn't do movies on the small screen. You wouldn't have the budget.
Yeah.
And so that you have to go to the cinema to see that sort of spectacle. But now they're putting them next to each other on a show bill. But you would see the difference if you went and saw this and then watched 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's night and day.
Yeah, there's a couple of years difference there. But yeah, it's just like the level of money and ambition they're putting into theatrical films to combat television because they're really scared of TV at this point. And so it's this bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of like movies are now.
Yeah.
Where they are constantly just like sinking ungodly sums of money into making these massive films to try to lure people to a theater to differentiate between television. They were kind of doing that in the 60s and they burnt themselves out, which is why the 70s gets much, smaller and more intimate character portraits, and movies really changed then.
Okay, Cam, do you have anything else for us?
No, that wraps me up on One Spy Too Many.
Okay, I can't wait to tackle these spies. Let's talk about the film. Alan, you're our guest. You're back on the show talking about U.N.C.L.E. this time. What do you think of One Spy Too Many?
Well, like I just mentioned, the first episode of the TV show is one of my favorite episodes. I think it's a really strong opener for the season. I think the idea of Alexander as going through and committing his 10 deadly sins or whatever you want to was a neat idea. I think when you tack on the weaker second episode and then add in that nonsensical Yvonne Craig subplot, as much as I love Yvonne Craig, I just found it a film with two halves, really. I enjoyed the first half, and then once we got past the pit and the pendulum homage, I was like, what are they doing? They're just running around from place to place. And at the end of the day, spoilers, they fail.
Yeah.
It's not U.N.C.L.E. that captures the bad guy and brings him to justice. they completely fail, and it was like, oh, I'd sort of forgotten that. So yeah, I was hooked for the first half, and I started to get bored in the second half, and I sort of, at the end of it, I was like, oh, that was actually pretty forgettable. And when I rewatched the TV show, it was like, oh, that was a much better, tighter edit. The film version felt really bloated.
It's interesting because I'm at a disadvantage here in many ways because I haven't seen the episodes of the television show. I'm just watching the films,
Mm-hmm.
which maybe that is an advantage because it's a different perspective. But I'll add in my thoughts a teeny bit. I'll dig into it more in a minute. But that is something I did experience, and I agree with you there, Alan. I think the second half of this film is a lot weaker than the first half. And I just put that down to it being just not particularly well put together and not particularly paced well at the end. It feels a bit sort of lackadaisical at the end. They're sort of strolling through the mission. There's not a lot of tension, not a lot of drama, not a lot of drive. And that may be just because the second episode is weaker than the first.
Well, it's like the first episode, you have that kind of propulsiveness of like he's stolen a gas and we need to track him down and stop him. That is kind of all forgotten in the second episode.
Yep.
And
Okay.
the second half of the movie then as well, because it's like the gas stuff is completely irrelevant. Like as a MacGuffin, it's actually very poor because it's almost entirely just dismissed at a certain point.
Well, I suppose I'd be doing the listeners a disservice because most people are just following along with the films. And we're just going to really try and critique the film itself without drawing too much of a distinction between the episodes if we can.
Yeah.
But what I'd be keen to sort of point out for people who've just seen the film, like myself, I don't know the answer to this question. But where is that delineation point in the movie? Where does it break and where is episode 1 end and 2 begin?
It's the pendulum.
Right, okay.
So the bit with the pendulum and the pit and the pendulum piece, that's the cliffhanger at the end of episode 1.
Yeah.
So you get the tomb and everything.
Yeah, they get caught. That's the cliffhanger at the end of episode 1.
Because the tomb is a really fun part. Like that's a really interesting thing I haven't seen. It's something I'll get into in my like section. But yeah, so that's I can see that is basically where my interest begins to sort of wane off.
Yeah, and I think that's very noticeable because you get to that second half and it's like, well, what are they doing? And it's weird because, like, I guess I'll segue into my thoughts here.
Sure.
Which is that I enjoy this film. I actually think it's more successful as a film than the previous one, The Spy with My Face, which felt like I like that TV episode, but when you stretched it out to feature length, it just felt weird. Like it wasn't
I agree.
driven by its main characters. It was just kind of an odd little entity. Whereas this one, it's weird because the pacing is quite poor. And as we said, like the division between the two episodes, when you watch the two episodes, you have the same reaction of going like, boy, the second half kind of dropped the ball on part one, and part one was really fantastic. But when you see it as a film all edited together at, an hour and 40 minutes, you feel that pace. And it kind of drags it down, even though why I think this one is better than the previous one is there are so many moments of inspired lunacy throughout. So even though the plot and storytelling is kind of dragging its butt by the time you get to the end, there's like a moment where, a bunch of farmers are going after Ilya in a field, and like,
I love that.
There's pitchforks and tractors, and I'm like, I've never seen this before in a spy movie. So it's like, if you can inject enough insane little bits into a Man from U.N.C.L.E. film like this, then it's going to hold my attention. But if I'm to critique it as a, hour and 40-minute film, it has a lot of problems.
I've never seen such slow tractors prove to be a menace for a secret agent, but hey ho, I mean they were coming at him pretty slowly, but there were many of them.
I had to think though, when David McCallum wound up in that bog and had to like duck his head under the water and everything, I'm like, he drew the short straw. Like Robert Vaughn got a nice stroll in the park compared to what he got.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the mud. I actually wrote down Ilya Manuryakin.
Oof.
Oh,
okay, all right.
Yeah, I will actually add to what I said on you goes. Yeah, as much as the second half dragged, it did have its moments. It had some great dialogue. The whole thing had some really witty dialogue throughout it, which I loved. And I did actually love the farm equipment as lethal weapons piece. And I actually also loved the fact that Ilya turned that against him when they actually used the one with the bucket, and he hid in the bucket out of line of sight of the guy who was operating it, and then used it for like his surprise attack that he used that to drag himself out of the hole and then sort of hitting it and jumped out of it. I thought, oh, that was neat. I've not seen that before. So.
And there's a real like sort of cost saving thing going on here because that is David McCallum being pulled out of the mud.
Yeah.
Much like that is Robert Vaughn actually fighting a guy with sticks in the gym.
Yeah.
You just kind of love to see your heroes being the person doing it. It's just that's a lot nicer than seeing a stunt double. But I suppose I'll just throw my hat in the ring in terms of my overall thoughts. I agree with you, Cam. I think it's better than the second one. I don't know if it matches up to the first. But if for me, I just feel like it's found its footing. It's found its voice, if you will. It's like they are comfortable in their roles. They know how to play them, and they know how a whimsical uncle episode is put together. Not that I've ever seen an episode, but I've only seen the films. But yeah, I was in love with it for the first sort of 45 minutes, and then I noticed that massive drop off. It fell into the pit with the pendulum, and and so yeah, that's what really holds it back for me. But it's still propped up by performances that I think are really good. You just can't beat David McCallum and Robert Vaughn in these roles. They are magnetic.
I find it interesting that your thing is, they found their footing, but having grown up with the shows and rewatched all the shows, that's a gradual thing for me.
Yeah.
It's like I've seen that development happen, but for you, it's like taking that leap from them being very, where does Ilya fit in?
Yeah.
What's the relationship in the previous two movies to this one? Which for those of us who've seen the show, I can't say I really noticed it because I've sort of seen that development and that growth throughout the show.
You see it going through its growing pains. I'm just sort of seeing the finished masterpieces.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or not masterpieces, as
I was going to say.
I think masterpiece is taking it a little too far. But
I don't know. Like, to me, there's also like a shift from like, there was a real cool factor to season one. Like, they played up what was like very unique characters in a way that just had like a little bit of a slightly harder edge and was really just magnetic to watch. Whereas I feel like this is kind of we're seeing the 60s camp come in, and that's not as cool.
But you could track that. I know they're different franchises, but the whole reason The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was successful on television, or a lot of the reason it was successful, is because of the success of James Bond. And James Bond started off with Dr. No and From Russia with Love, but hey-ho, 3 years later, they're making Thunderball and You Only Live Twice. Tonally contrasting. Let's say that. That's a nice way of putting it. Add another 3-4 years, you've got Diamonds Are Forever, which is like, I think it's less than 10 years between Diamonds Are Forever and Dr. No.
Well, and this movie feels very akin to like where the Matt Helm films would be going, or Our Man Flint comes out the same year as the film does. It comes out, Our Man Flint comes out a year after the episode, Alexander the Greater Affair. But yeah, it's like that kind of 60s Bond influence stuff is definitely headed in this direction.
Which actually, I just realized it is definitely your third appearance, Alan, because we've always tackled 60s things with you. You've done a Flint film, you've done Casino Royale 67, and now you're an Uncle Man now, so you're the 60s spy expert around here.
Oh dear, I'm just showing my age, I guess.
Well,
you're just going to the old guy for the 60s stuff. That's all.
We should have had you on for XXX3.
Ah, yes, yeah, that would have been much better, or the 355.
When you do Dr. Bikini and Goldfoot, give me a call.
We've already bikini bombed and girl bombed and
okay.
Girl bombs and the
bikini machine.
Yeah,
the Bikini Machine, Dr. Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine. Yes, that was it.
I never want to go back to Franco and Chichio if I can get away with it. Thank you. I still have nightmares about them in an air balloon. Let's talk about likes. Things we liked about this film. Let's break it down. Get specific. Alan, something you really liked about this film?
I loved the character of Tracy Alexander. The whole running gag of her trying to serve her divorce papers or her settlement papers, but then she realizes that the uncle guys are like, oh no, you hated it, but you're too frail. It's too dangerous. And she's like, no, if I actually tag along with these guys, I can actually get what I want out of it, which is get my settlement papers signed and get my $1 million back. And the way she does that, the way she smoozes Alexander Waverly when she eventually meets him, she's a smart cookie, and I like the fact that she ends up using the uncle guys as much as they end up using her. I think she's a very interesting character, and probably one of the ones that actually does go across both halves of the movie equally tonally. I thought she was great, and I also mentioned, I love some of the dialogue. That thing about, you're really attached to that $1 million, and she's like, well, it's when it's the only $1 million you have, yeah. Some of that stuff I thought was great. Cool moments for Napoleon Solo. The bit when he picks the heavy's gun out of his pocket and then walks over and just drops it on the waiter's tray. All cool.
When he kicks in the door of the lawyer's office.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Badass.
Yeah.
Cam was swooning over Napoleon Solo, it sounds like.
Every episode.
I'll just jump on about Mrs. Alexander, Tracy Alexander, played by Dorothy Provine. I was looking her up afterwards because I actually was really taken with her performance too.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was a really fun contrast on this original idea of like Napoleon Solo turns up every episode, whisks a woman away on a spy story, and she's wowed by the world of espionage. Whereas this is like she doesn't give a monkeys about the world of espionage. She just wants her money.
Yeah.
And I mean, we'd all understand that motivation for a start. Patreon.com/Spyhards, but yeah, it's I totally get where she's coming from, and I wouldn't be wowed by it either.
And she has some great physical comedy too. Like even the way she's introduced, like posing as a mannequin in a store window, and you get Robert Vaughn's reaction to her, and what like a great intro. But there's the bit where she gets like dumped down the the baggage claim.
Yeah.
And like just so beautifully well done, and just how she is kind of that fly in the ointment in a certain way throughout this. There's the part where they're like staking out the rock quarry, and she's just like asleep in the back of the car. I loved it. And the bit at the end where it's her like kissing Ilya and then going off and flirting, with the the president figure that was going to be assassinated. And it's like, oh, she'll be fine. And it's just like, who is this woman? Why does she not have her own spin-off TV show? Forget like the girl from U.N.C.L.E. Give me the Tracy Chronicles, where we just go along with this very interesting flighty woman as she bounces from adventure to adventure.
Alexander the Greatest.
Well, yeah.
No, I completely agree. And you actually were spinning me off into one of the things I liked there, Cam, because you mentioned the mannequin. And I wanted to just sort of tip my hat to, because I said in the last review, I liked it was beginning to get a bit quirky. The little like rocket firing, little robots and things like that in the last film. This has got quirkiness wall to wall. This is, you mentioned the mannequin. I also wrote down, there's a human chess game in this film. Never seen that.
Never seen that. Ever. And it's incredible.
And like everyone leans into it as if it's a thing people do. It makes me wonder about the 60s and what was in the drinking water at that point, because everyone's like, oh, we're having a human chess game. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to put a hat on. And who's doing this? I just don't understand. But it's great. And you've also got things like we mentioned the tomb. I also wrote down party door, which I can't remember what that actually means or in context. Party door. There's probably something that was quirky about a party door in this film. But yes, there's a lot of like moments of not insanity. It's not like I mentioned Diamonds Are Forever, like turn 2 up to 11, but it has its own like internal sense of humor and a small wink at the viewer. And I just really like that edge to it. It's a nice, not too comedic, but it's just fun.
Well, there's so many moments of just inspired weirdness in this. And, you're citing them, but like even mummifying Ilya at the end. I'm like, what? Like, what am I watching? This is wonderful.
Well, I wouldn't sell live mummification as wonderful, Cam. Be careful.
It was wonderful because it was just, it's the kind of thing we don't see in spy movies very much, if ever. I don't know that we'll ever see it again. And we had farmer fights. We've got mummifications. We've got a tomb sequence that is like fun because it kind of pays homage almost to those creaky like serials where people would be in tombs. But there's some really cool stuff there when you have Alexander with the 3 mirrors and them opening fire on the different mirrors. Like that's a really great moment. You also just have like so many just small moments throughout this that are just so bizarre. The one that I'll never get out of my head that's so weird is you have that Grecian urn spa.
Yeah.
And you have the goon, the David Sheiner character, who's sitting there at a desk getting a pedicure.
He's getting a pedicure with like red nail varnish, by the way, folks. Like he's fancy.
He is, and he's like drinking like a glass of, I don't know, brandy or something like that, and watching a CCTV of the women working out in the spa. And I'm like, this is a perfect storm of 60s like craziness that I am seeing right now. This is a throwaway moment to them, I'm sure, when they're shooting the episode, but there's a lot of moments like that.
And he's like reacting to what's on the screen and going like, I almost want to like cut that out and change what's on the screen to like a clip of Moonraker or something like that, just to make it fun. I really feel like that moment is particularly memeable. If anyone has the facility to capture that moment and have fun with it, let us know.
Or he's watching footage of Big Jim McClane.
Yeah, House Stand the Union. He's like, a woman.
Yeah. So there's like so many little bits like that. When I was making my notes, that's where a lot of it came from, was just like, that's weird. Even like the Yvonne Craig story, which is so tacked on. And I've noticed they tend to like inject a lot of like horny material into these Man from U.N.C.L.E. films. There was a lot of that in the previous one and this one as well. It's like Robert Vaughn does not have a love interest in the Alexander the Greater affair, and it's fine. It's a really well done, 2-part episode. The second half's not as good, but you get it. Like the character stuff is on point. They inject so many moments of Robert Vaughn looking like a pervert and a lech throughout this movie that you're like, okay. And I'm baffled at Alexander Waverly's uncle duties here. And I don't mean uncle as in the organization. I mean uncle to his niece Yvonne Craig.
I don't think anyone working with James Bond would be pimping out their relatives to James Bond.
Yeah.
It's like feeding your friend into a meat grinder.
Yeah, it's like and you end it with Robert Vaughn escorting off Yvonne Craig being like, well, I'm off to go hang out with your niece. And Alexander Waverly's like, well, what are you going to do?
Things you do for your country. Oh.
Well, he set her up. So,
yeah.
It was interesting. They did actually put in a lot more sexually explicit stuff as well, like with the princess. Alexander, you don't see any of that in the TV show. That's all it all happens behind closed doors. It's hinted at, but you don't actually see it. The stuff with her in the sort of jacuzzi trying to tempt Robert Vaughn, again, that's added in for the movie, I believe. So yeah, they did show a lot more, and they played up the sexual side of it a lot more in the movie than the TV show. I know we're not talking about the TV show, but there are certain things. There was also I don't know if you noticed, but they changed Robert Vaughn's dialogue to, and I don't know which way around they did it first, but when he's in the bedroom and he's going down the buttons, and he gets to the last one in the movie, he says, "Oh, aphrodisiac mist. I'll take his word for it." Well, in the TV show, he says tranquilizer mist.
Oh.
Which puts a completely different spin on things. And there's a couple of other places where they changed his dialogue, like one word or 2 words in his dialogue on the TV show to sort of get away from some of the sexual implications.
To be fair, I've heard people use Spyhards podcast as a tranquilizer mist in the past.
Yeah,
it really does work. And Cam, I assume you include the live mummification as part of your horniness package, right?
Of course. Well, you have David McCallum there in his boxers,
He is a little bit of like an S&M get up going there. Like if you're a McCallum fan, you're getting an eyeful.
Uh-huh.
You saw his Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Mm-hmm. Well,
he really opened Channel D.
I was own that one, Scott. I was very disappointed though. One of the crazy parts of the 2-parter, there's just one little snippet that they take out, which is actually also inspired lunacy, which is actually that Alexander the Greater has chained his parents up in a rock quarry, like working in a mine, and that's why they're in the rock quarry in the TV episode, is to liberate them. And the mom is played by Aunt Harriet from Batman 66, and it's like, what a weird thing for your villain. Like, that's not something you see in most movies where, like, the villain has chained his parents up in a rock quarry. And so that's why in the escape here, when you have the chase, which is well handled, I thought the chase outside the rock quarry, but there's a number 5 in the background. And it's because he's broken the honor thy mother and father.
Oh. Yeah, why would you take that out? Like,
which makes no sense in the movie.
Yeah, it makes no sense why that 5 is there, but that's why it was. And I think they just took it out to inject more kind of like innuendos and make room for Yvonne Craig.
But if you actually look very carefully during the quarry case, you can actually very quickly see his parents in the back of the car that Ilya and Napoleon are in when they're escaping.
I know. I noticed that too.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine in that era, no one was
taking that note. No.
distracted by that. No.
They weren't expecting a podcast 60 years later.
Yeah, 50 years' time, these three guys are going to spend their afternoon looking at this thing frame by frame.
Well, I think I'll tell you, the parents were in the scene.
Watching these DVDs on 4K TVs.
Nice try, Joseph Sargent. We got you. Cam, over to you, though. A final like.
I think for me, because it's the craziness of it that is my main like. So it's the inspired kind of lunacy of the One Spy Too Many film. But it is that kind of, I think you summed it up, Scott, like that perfect two-hander of Robert Vaughn and David McCallum, which has been uneven a lot on the show. They do have episodes where the two of them have a lot to do, but there's a lot of episodes where suddenly Robert Vaughn is just the star and Ilya disappears. And then there's like an episode or two where Ilya is the star and Robert Vaughn is like just sitting in the office for the hour. Here, I think it's a really well done two-parter in that both feel like they have equal amounts to do, even though they go in different directions. So you get Ilya having that really fun farm fight, but then you also have Robert Vaughn battling like the weightlifter dude. Ingo, who I think is incredible. I think the moment where he picks up and like manhandles Robert Vaughn, I mean, that is a gif waiting to be made, Scott, so get on that. But, you know, that sequence is as inspired as the farm fight, and they play them kind of back to back. So it really does feel like they're, this is probably the wrong way to say this, but servicing their two lead characters. Like they feel like they are actually... when they're writing the script, they're like, okay, how do we balance these out so both characters are really fun, have individual kind of stories, but also tie together really well? And I haven't seen it done in one of these movies this well until now.
Yeah, I can only agree with you there. I was waiting for this moment. You know, the first film did make the knock list, and I said the only thing it was against it is it didn't have enough of the two as a dynamic duo, like the men from U.N.C.L.E. And this is the antidote to that. This is exactly what I asked for. Both people having agency, and you know, and having their own spotlight. They both get action sequences. They both feel part of the story, and I hope that is something that continues in the subsequent films.
Yeah, I did have a question for you, Scott. Did you recognize Ingo the bodybuilder?
I did not recognize Ingo the bodybuilder. I did get a flashback. Or a flash forward, perhaps, to 1983's Never Say Never Again.
Oh, yeah.
Where they have the exact same shot of, you see Robert Vaughn pressed up against the wall by a barbell, and you get the same shot of Sean Connery pressed down by a machine by Pat Roach, of course, from Auf Wiedersehen, Pet.
That's right.
Yeah, so I saw that similarity, but no, where would I have a connection to him?
Red alert. Ingo played an alien in the original series Star Trek episode Friday's Child.
He's Keel.
Yeah, Keel.
Oh, see, I mean, it's interesting you chose to do Red Alert now and not the 10 other times we've already referenced Star Trek in this episode.
I feel like when it's that obscure, it has to be a red alert.
So people could just hit, like, pause and leave. Like, oh, here we go again.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red Alert Spyhards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Scott, we are ending Halloween 2024 not with a scream, but with a chuckle, because we are going to tackle 2004's Shaun of the Dead, which is celebrating its 20th anniversary. So grab a pint and let's have a great time, Winchester style.
So don't get left out in the cold. Help support your favorite spy movie podcast and join the circus at patreon.com/spyhards. But before this message self-destructs, let's get back to the spy jinx. Well, folks, his peaches may be the best you've ever tasted, but I'm not sure about the rest of his fruit. So let's talk about the downsides to one spy too many. And I want to hear from you first, Alan. You've mentioned a couple of things you didn't like too much, but let's dig into one. What's a particular dislike you have?
I think my main dislike was that realization at the end that Uncle failed.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the day, Alexander got away. It was down to his mentor, basically, who just got rid of him. And this is a slight, sort of going on the what we were just talking about people being familiar from other things. You mentioned David Sheiner has multiple roles in Man from U.N.C.L.E. going forward. He also plays multiple parts in Mission Impossible. And I've been watching a lot of Mission Impossible lately, and it was like, oh, that guy is so familiar. And also the guy who plays the professor, Mr. Vaughn, David, I'm going to butcher his last name, Opatoshu or something. Anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway.
I could buy that, yeah.
He plays multiple roles in Mission Impossible too, and I've been working my way through the Mission Impossible DVDs recently, so it was like, I was sort of thrown out a bit by it. Instead of taking the character, it's like, oh, it's that guy. Oh, it's that guy. But I think, you mentioned, the franchises that were going on at that time, there was a lot of people who were either in front of the camera and behind the camera who were working on all those different shows. That was just a minor thing for me. But really, I think for me, main thing was the resolution of the plot just felt, you mentioned the gas. There's all the big thing at the beginning with the gas, and we've got to find the gas. We've got to trace it down, and that's what drives the first half. And then you halfway through the second half, and Alexander Light just gives it to two people and says, "Here you go." And we don't find out what we do with it. And then right at the end, we get Waverly just says, "Oh, we recovered the gas." I'm like, "Really?
Yeah,
that was it." What was the show about the gas? Was it about him committing the 10? It seemed to be more about him committing the 10 deadly sins than it did about. I know the gas was one of the sins in the fact that he stole it, but I don't know. I wasn't quite sure what the actual scheme that they were trying to thwart was. It just all seemed very coincidental, if you like.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. And I think that's a problem that I had with The Spy with My Face, the previous film. Is there's a whole MacGuffin about a space defense laser in that's briefly in it, with a door that just defends against aliens, apparently, which we'll leave. We won't dig into that too much or the science behind it. But they never really mention it again.
Mm-hmm.
It's used as a MacGuffin very briefly, and then they just get on with a different part of the plot. But they have this massive thing they make a big song and dance out of for a couple of scenes, and then just completely forget about. So is that like a product of the U.N.C.L.E. episodes in general? Do they just have like a MacGuffin most of the time, and it's just sort of resolved?
They quite often do have a MacGuffin that it's something that gets them involved in the case, and then they uncover a bigger plot.
Yeah,
as part of that. But it usually works a lot better than it did here. The two didn't really seem that related. I mean, I know there was a connection, but
I wonder if it's because they set up the gas in part 1 of the two-parter, but it's like they've got to write, basically 2 hours of content, and they just kind of run out of inspiration after the first hour and are like, okay, let's go do something else. But when you watch it as an entire film, it's very noticeable that it's just not, working, and that they're abandoning it completely. And I also find the ending very frustrating because you get that great stunt sequence where he's on the hood of the car,
that looks
getting
great.
into the back of the plane.
Yeah,
right? Like, and in those days, I think it was a TV budget, so it might have been even recklessly done, but it looked incredible. Same with like Alexander falling backwards out a window, where I'm like,
yeah,
did that stuntman survive that? Like, holy smokes! But
I wrote down rip torn Macintoshed out the window.
yeah.
But
so you get on the plane, and I like the fight on the plane, but then you get Robert Vaughn falling out of the plane and then having to like slow motion mime that he's falling and putting on a parachute, which is amazing. Like, people, check this out for no other reason than to watch Robert Vaughn slow motion try to sell that he's free falling and putting on a parachute in midair. It's incredible stuff. But everything that kind of comes from Alexander's big plot is kind of just not coincidence, but it's kind of poorly told, where you have Dr. Cavon turning on him and stabbing him with a spear because ultimately his downfall was his arrogance. But you don't really get those chips being taken away from like Cavon throughout the story. Like it feels almost arbitrary when he pulls out a spear and stabs him, and then the plane explodes, and it's like, okay. It also had a very depressing moment where Dr. Cavon talks about being an old man, and the actor was 48 years old.
Oh no.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, he was 48 at the time of shooting. Yeah.
I can't. I don't think I have too much invested in that ending. I have to say, because by that point I was mildly checked out.
Yeah.
I can see what you mean about, like, logically as you're both talking it through, how it's unsatisfying to not have your heroes win the day. So I can't fault anything you said. It just, like, I don't think I registered it as a dislike because I was just sort of, can we go now, please?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are we there yet? Which is a bit of an immature way of looking at it. But I will pivot this off into my dislike.
Okay.
And it's interesting we haven't spoken about this person because I thought I would be the contrarian in the room. And I thought you'd both be praising his performance. And that is Rip Torn.
You know, so many people online praised this performance, and I was kind of in hot take territory myself.
Wow, okay. I might have some friends here, which is nice because I found like this was such a broad canvas to paint with. He was given such an interesting character with a very fun plot, worthy of a Bond story in his own way. Like they gave him a lot with the Ten Commandments as like his list of things to do before he becomes a megalomaniacal bad guy. But he plays it so like reserved.
Mm-hmm.
Like he has a human chess game and he's just talking. Now, some actors could see that as like playing it like low energy as sinister. And I can see that being their take on it. But for me, I would have swung for the fences on this character. I feel like if you're doing this and your modus operandi is the Ten Commandments, that's your prescription for being the world's biggest bad guy. You need to go as big as the people in the source material of the Ten Commandments themselves. Go villainous, go arch, go huge, and he doesn't do any of that.
It was a very one-note performance, and I wondered if his take on it was that everything he was doing, because felt he was so great, everything he was doing was sort of slightly beneath him and not really worthy of his full attention. But I agree with the two of you. Yeah, I don't really rate. I think stronger in the first half, and then I don't really know what we're doing with this character in the second half, and it became a very one-note performance, I think.
He becomes so aloof, and maybe that is, yeah, as you say, like tied to that kind of arrogance and being above it all. But I think maybe his best moment is in the tomb, where it's him with the mirrors. I think that might be the one, and you know, the chess scene is pretty good as well. But outside of that, like, there's something very, I think, internal about Rip Torn, and I don't know I don't know a lot about Rip Torn in terms of his acting in this era or going into the 70s. I know him more from later days, you know, Men in Black, of course, and other things like that. But he just seems like way too brooding, and it just doesn't work, because maybe he is saying, look at all this craziness around me. I need to be kind of the center point of this. I need to be kind of the calm, cool, force kind of working his way through this story. But I would have left that to your lead characters. Let them be kind of your straight men for this story, and go a little bit bigger. Like, go a little maniacal. Let those cracks come through, because it's more fun for the audience. And you never really see it. And maybe that's why it's so unsatisfying, his death, because, I don't know, he doesn't really even react to that. It just is like a very cold, sociopathic dude that I don't have a lot of fun with. And I honestly don't understand his gimmick, honestly, because he keeps talking about Alexander the Great and how he wants to be greater than Alexander the Great. He's stolen this gas, which is like a passive gas, I suppose, for the uses. You would use it to like conquer people, basically. He never uses the gas. He never really shows any great signs of wanting to conquer lands other than dealing with this prince, this kind of blackmailing, sort of maneuvering with this prince played by James Hong in an earlier role, to basically get political power and land, perhaps. But like outside of that, what is he doing? He's talking about the 10 Commandments. I don't know that really applies to Alexander the Great so well.
Well, they're not connected.
It's so strange. No,
there's no connection.
there's no connection. So it's like this guy is mixing his metaphors. Like, what does he want to do? And there's so much of it is driven by like Greek elements. You know, some of it is set in Greece. He's got the Grecian urn spad that is a cover. All these various things that are Greek. But then we're talking about the 10 Commandments, and I'm just like, it felt like the writers basically had a board of villain ideas and were like, give him 4 of them.
But this is I think where the disappointment comes for me, because I think if you give this material as is to someone like, let's go with Gert Frobe.
Yeah.
Okay, who we've seen him play big as Goldfinger. Like this, he would fit this role very well. He's a big man. He would big personality. He would take up the room, and he would like, ha ha ha, ha nice try, Mr. Solo, and that sort of thing. Whereas it feels so understated that I never really feel like he's particularly passionate about any of the stuff he's doing. I think there's like one moment where he raises his voice and he says, "You weren't here, so we lost the battle," which I'm still not quite sure what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I think it was the chess battle, maybe.
I think so. Yeah.
But the guy was there that was flying the helicopter when he lost the chess battle, so I never really understood where that point came from.
The only time you see him really unhinged, really, though, is when he's in the desert screaming at the helicopter. And I'm
That's
like,
what I mean. That
bit, that's the moment where like some madness
yeah.
comes through. But it almost feels like it's more an actor annoyed in the desert than something that's character driven the way that you would hope. I don't know. It feels to me almost like a Dominic Green performance in The Spy Who Loved Me. It's like that's not the villain performance you want in that movie.
Oh God, could you imagine that? That's a nightmare.
Like it would drag down everything, right? Like you'd have all this inspired fun going on. You've got under the sea cars and big battles in tankers, and you just have like a villain who's very kind of like quiet and reserved. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I think you actually hit it on the head when you were talking about Gert Frobe, would dominate the room, or he doesn't. I mean, he's got no on-screen presence as this character. You don't really feel that anybody's actually taking that much notice of him when he is in the room. I don't know. There's just no presence to him as a villain, I think. So,
that's just what surprised me when I saw some of the reviews online too. I saw what you saw to Cam. I thought I would be the weird one here. So I'm glad that you're both joining me in this. But I wonder what other people are seeing in this performance that I'm not. I'd love to hear from you folks. Let us know. Spyhardspod@gmail.com. Right in.
Yeah.
But Cam, what about you? A dislike?
Well, I mean, the music I mentioned up front. I just am not a fan of this.
Yeah.
Style of music. I would almost hope that they would have just conducted new music for the film version, the way they did with some of the other ones a little bit.
Right.
But not so much. I think they were kind of cutting down the amount of effort they were putting into these films, considering the sheer amount of footage that was in the previous two that they'd added on versus this one.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely saw them putting less and less effort into these theatrical films. But I guess like the other dislike, and we did talk about it earlier, because a lot of my quibbles with this really are the Alexander story and how it isn't very propulsive. But the pace of this is tough. I think when you get to that second half of it, it really does feel like you are just dragging your feet, moving very slowly through events that your heroes don't really have a clear objective as to what they need to do at this point. And so it's a lot of like, okay, let's go over there and find Alexander. Oh, he got the one up on us. He tied us up. Okay, let's go do that again. These are supposed to be really smart characters. And the best episodes of U.N.C.L.E, I think, really showcase the smarts of both Robert Vaughn and David McCallum's characters, where they are incredibly bright. And I think there would be a better way to tackle this, where they are matching wits with someone who is at a high level. Alexander the Greater is someone that would test them. And you don't get the sense of that. It feels almost like they're going up against, like, I don't know, King Tut or the Mad Hatter on the Batman 66 TV show. Whereas it should have been taking its cues from that chess game. Like, these are people trying to outthink a strong opponent, but I almost have the sense like the writers, it's tough to write very, very, very smart characters and very smart plots. And I almost feel like they gave up in the second half. And they shouldn't have, because I think when you're going to set up your villain through a chess match, you have to pay that off later. And I think that would have affected the pace hugely if it was kind of the tightening of the screws.
Yeah, I think during our exploration of this and talking about the construction of it with the 2 episodes, I think I can understand now how we ended up with the pace that we ended up with. And so I'm less sort of annoyed by the whole product because I think it's more just a result of the episodes. You can't change that now.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if you're going to do edits like taking scenes of the parents out and adding other scenes in, you could have done something to punch it up a little bit. It didn't need to be an hour and 41 minutes. It could have been an hour and 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Or they could have used some of that budget for the Yvonne Craig subplot. Not that there was a lot of budget in it anyway, but some of that screen time to actually beef up more of the character stuff for the second half, I think.
It's so tough with the Yvonne Craig stuff because she's wonderful on screen.
Sure.
I'll never complain about having her there.
No, I love her. She's great.
But
I bought a sun lamp just because of her.
well, it was quite an advertisement. Yeah, I mean, she does nothing in this film.
No.
Right? Like
No.
anyone who's coming to this and doesn't have kind of the awareness of like the behind the scenes of her being added into a 2-part TV episode must be so confused why this character is just interrupting the movie constantly. And that's something these movies have bumped up against with some of their added footage in the past. I think the best handling was probably the first movie.
Luciana Paluzzi, yeah. I think she was the best insert.
Yeah. I think that's the best handling of it. But this one, it's just like, frankly, it goes back to pace. If you have your characters who you're trying to build momentum up, you don't want to cut away to something that has nothing to do with what they're doing.
Yeah, you take the energy right out of you lose momentum.
Yeah.
Which is the shame. But let's move on to any final notes that we have before we look at the knock list. Alan, anything you want to mention about the film before we wrap it up?
I think I covered most of the things that I had in mind. Like I said, I just find it interesting that I do remember particularly that first episode of the TV show, but I'd pretty much forgotten that this movie was based on that story until I went back to rewatch it. It didn't really stick in my mind, and I think for a lot of the reasons that we talked about is the pacing, and it just sort of fell away, which is a shame. I think they could. I love the idea of somebody going out and breaking the Ten Commandments as his villain stick. I think they could have done so much with that, and I think it was a missed opportunity to do that because they added so many other layers on top that seemed superfluous, which is a shame.
Well, I think then for me, I've got about 3. What have you got, Cam?
So we have actor Teru Shimada, who shows up as the president. There's a Bond crossover because he was Osato in You Only Live Twice. So that's noteworthy. And I think he's fun actually in this, where he gets stabbed and he's like, haha, got you, Alexander. I had the intel on this one. I thought he was fun in a fairly small role. A couple other notes I had. The death of the Sheiner goon character, where he's shot by Ilya and gets somehow misplaced into the back of a married couple's car as they drive off, and you get the scream. I thought that was actually a really effective comedic beat. That's really funny.
It's like you get to see the end play out from when Fiona Volpe dies.
Right.
And they leave her body there, and you've got that couple sat at the table. Can you imagine 2 minutes later when they're like, oh, she's not moving. Oh, she's fallen to the floor. Oh, there's blood. Ah!
And I had a question for you, Scott.
Okay.
Did you recognize the princess played by Donna Michelle?
I feel like I did. I feel like I did recognize her. I feel like I've seen her face before. I'm sure you're going to tell me it was probably a Dean Martin film.
Nope. So
Oh.
we actually talked about her in the previous Man from U.N.C.L.E. film,
Oh.
The Spy with My Face. She was the masseuse that at one point knocked out Robert Vaughn.
Was she?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. I did not make that connection, but I obviously recognized the face. That was one of the silliest massages in film history because it served zero purpose.
That's true.
But she did appreciate his latissimus dorsi.
Who doesn't?
Well,
My-
I'm more of a, after seeing it this week, I'm more of a David McCallum's latissimus dorsi kind of guy.
Scott's mummifying himself as we speak.
Wrap me up.
And the final note I had was, this is a very small one, but it made me laugh really hard. There's a scene where we have Uncle headquarters, I think, but it's a street scene. And there are picketers in the background going around. And they all just have signs that say, unfair.
No, yeah.
Wait, what was unfair?
I don't know. It's up to the imagination.
The price of dry cleaning?
Whatever it was, they were angry, but they were very non-specific about what their political cause was.
What do we want? We don't know. When do we want it? Sometime.
It's unfair.
For me, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, and we've done a lot of red alerts, but whenever I read about the original series of Star Trek, I often read about Batman 66 and the Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah.
And until this point, I hadn't really seen it.
Yep.
But now I see it manifest in this film. People make comparisons that, Solo and Kuryakin are Kirk and Spock.
Mm.
And I see that sort of that dynamic there. You've got the go get 'em hero take charge in Kirk and Solo, and you've got the thoughtful scientist in Spock and Kuryakin. I think that's a winning combination. I don't think that makes Waverly McCoy, but the ages do match up.
No, he would be one of those random admirals that pop in episode to episode.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. But that leads me on to my point. Kirk and Spock had a lot of this, but what I want to know is, where is the Solo and Kuryakin slash fiction?
Oh, it has to exist.
Oh, there is a lot.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes. There is still a very thriving Man from U.N.C.L.E. fan community out there, and believe you me, there are a lot of that. There's also unauthorized novels and stuff that fan novels and stuff that's out there. So yeah, if you really want to go look for it, it's there.
After I'm done mummifying myself, I shall be frantically Googling.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'll Google. I'll do it with voice activation, I imagine. I'd like to know what they call it. Is it slash fiction for them, or do they have an uncle pun for it?
Oh.
I can't say I've dug into it that deeply, but I do know that I have seen it when I was doing the research. Okay,
yeah. I have something to look forward to, and so do you all, listeners, when you Google this immediately afterwards. And finally, one thing I was promised a lot of in the promotional material for The Man from U.N.C.L.E, but haven't seen until this point, though it might have appeared in the first season of the show, is we get the first, for me, appearance in the films of the U.N.C.L.E special, The Gun.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that might have been in season 1, but for me, I actually got to see it in use and assembled in the car, kind of like, Brosnan in Tomorrow Never Dies, as McCallum's laying in the back. You may correct me and say it was in season 1, but it's the first time I've seen it, and it is a very cool little gadget that I guess, and I imagine, sold a lot of toys.
Oh, that was the main merchandise thing, was the guy. But actually, the shot of them in this movie, in this episode slash movie, of them in the quarry when they actually break out the U.N.C.L.E specials and they're stood behind the car, the two of them firing, that is like one of the key promotional images used throughout U.N.C.L.E merchandising history, promotional stuff. That's like the shot of the two of them in action, and it came from this
Right.
episode slash movie. Yeah.
Didn't this also introduce like the pen, like microphone things?
That was interesting because you can tell season 2 is when the radio did become the pen. Yes.
Yeah.
Because in season 1 it was more the size of a cigarette packet,
which he does use in this film too, on the airplane.
Yeah, that's actually a reused shot from season 1 with new dialogue dubbed in, because you can tell it's a season 1 shot because he's using the cigarette packet, when the rest of the episode slash movie they're using the pen communicator, which then became standard from then on.
There you go. The more you know. That's why you are the lexicon. And rumor has it there might be an U.N.C.L.E lexicon in our future.
Well, don't hold your breath. Yeah, okay, you got me. So I'm going way back in time now, but probably when we had the deal with the original publisher for the James Bond Lexicon way back when, the deal was for actually 2 books. One was for the Bond Lexicon, and the second one was going to be an U.N.C.L.E lexicon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go into all the details as to why that fell apart and we moved on and so forth. But that still remains a background project. We probably got 70% of the research done. We've done all the novels, all the magazines, the TV show, the movies, really just digging into the comics. Some of the comics are very hard to track down, or have got ridiculously expensive if you can find them. So just say we haven't done all the novels, probably about halfway through the novels. So yeah, that's become very much a background project, but I have other books. I keep getting contracts for other stuff, so which is a good thing, but it's still ticking over. Like every time I read probably once or twice a year, I'll drag out an U.N.C.L.E novel and read through that and add it to the database. So it's
Well, there's so few Uncle books out there. There's some wonderful ones that I've got from my collection for like resources, but yeah, I think Uncle fans around the world would appreciate any sort of insight into the world of Uncle. So keep at it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that's the other thing. I'm not actually quite sure how big the audience for it would be.
Interesting.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
You're only one blockbuster reboot away from having massive interest, right? Like,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I thought 2015 we
Yeah,
were in,
yeah.
you know, and then
maybe a new
Yeah.
TV show, something. Yeah,
I loved that movie. It's not an Uncle movie, but I love the movie. Yeah, I thought we were going to be in 2015, and we'd find somebody who was interested in picking it up. But
never know, never know.
Always possibilities. But speaking of possibilities, it's time to analyze One Spy Too Many to find out if it's making the knock list. Now, Alan, you're an old hat at this point. This is your third time on the knock list. But for those who are tuning in for the first time, Cam, could you tell the listeners what the knock list is?
Yes, the knock list is our need to see official classics of the Spyhards podcast, where every week after we have talked about a film, we decide if it belongs in the Pantheon. A very appropriate term to use this week, as we had Alexander the Great and his weird Greek things going on. But this Pantheon, we are looking to include all the kind of the movies that were you to hand them to someone who'd never seen a spy film, would give them kind of a great compendium of titles to select from that kind of sum up the best or the most interesting of the genre.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of interesting entries on it over the last 4 years of the show. There's a link, I think, in the show notes below. You can go find it. If not, you could just Google Spyhards knock list and you can see it online too. The films that are on there so far. But let's get to it. Alan, you're up first. Guests go first. Yes or no, is One Spy Too Many making the knock list?
No, I don't think so. I think there are better examples of Uncle out there to come, hopefully, if my memory serves. I think the first movie, based on the first TV show, the first season opening episode, is a good introduction. I think that did make your knock list, didn't it, to Trap a Spy? But I don't think this compares. I don't think it's particularly... It's entertaining, particularly the first half. It's got some fun moments, but it's not something I would show a non-spy fan to try and get them hooked.
It's interesting because it's memorable, you can say, about this film. I don't know if I remember so many moments about The Spy with My Face or anything like that, but I will remember moments from this film.
Yeah.
Like the chest, the mummification, the tomb. Like that's going to stick in my memory.
Totally, yeah.
But Cam, what about you?
Yeah, it's a no for me. I'm feeling better and better about putting To Trap a Spy in the knock list because I just feel like that was the one... I feel like the amount of effort they're putting into these theatrical features is dropping off, too. Like, the edits in this, it feels like a TV episode. They're not even trying to kind of recut it to make it feel a little more cinematic the way that the To Trap a Spy did. I think that one was just the best assembled. And yes, the Ilya factor is a little down in that one, but in terms of storytelling and presenting kind of something approximating a big screen experience, I feel a lot better about To Trap a Spy than this, which is kind of baggy. It feels a little low effort in terms of the additions, and it's packed with fun moments, but as an overall whole, it can be frustrating.
I can't agree more. I think it's an interesting effort so far. I'll remember this more than the second one. As I said, memorable moments will stick with me. But is it one of the best I've ever seen? I don't think so. And yeah, I agree with you, Cam. I'm glad we picked To Trap a Spy to go on the list. But for me, it's a no. And as such, that's 3 no's. One Spy Too Many is not making the knock list. The dossier on the film is complete and filed as classified. That leaves me to my last hosting duty, and that is thanking you, Alan, for coming on the show for your third time to talk Uncle.
Thank you very much for having me on. Always happy to talk Uncle and spy shows, and it's great to be chatting with you two guys again. Really enjoyed it.
Always a genuine pleasure, and you proved the lexicon handle once again with the tidbits you dropped in here. Thank you for that. For those who want to hear more from you, from your podcast, where can they find you online, on social media, etc., like that?
If you go to my website, alanjporter.com, and check the lists page, you can find links to all the multiple places that I appear on the web. And if you want to keep up with what I'm doing on a weekly basis, I have a weekly newsletter, which is you can subscribe for free at alanjporter.substack.com.
and we will put links in the show notes below to that as well. So you just get a click right down there. But
Thank you.
Alan, sincere pleasure. Thank you once again for coming on the show.
Thank you, guys. Really enjoyed it.
And better luck on the knock list next time, Alan. I know that's three no's so far, but we'll get there one day.
Is that 3 no's?
It is, yeah. Mad Helm, Casino Royale 67,
67,
and now One Spy Too Many.
Don't forget, you guys have still got to do Cars 2, so...
Oh, guaranteed lock.
There you go, folks. That was our chat on One Spy Too Many. I want to thank, once again, our guest, Mr. Alan J. Porter, for coming on the show. You can find out more about his podcast, his books, and his website, all in the show notes below. But I guess the question becomes now, we can take off our little triangles with numbers written on them, hang them up on the way out of the dry cleaner. Cam, what are we talking about next week?
We are going to tackle one of the very few horror spy films. We are going to look at 1981's Possession, starring Isabelle Adjani and Sam Neill. This is a body horror thriller, so folks, strap yourselves in.
This is a very unique film, and there are many times, I'll always say your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to watch Possession and join us next week. I just said it. Congratulations, you've heard it. But I'm stressing this one now. If you have the time in the next week, sit down and watch Possession and come back for the discussion. We've already recorded it before we recorded this. It's a fascinating discussion about the film. And the film itself, I think, needs to be watched to appreciate the discussion. That might turn some people off from listening to the episode, and that's okay. But if you can track down the film, I think you'll appreciate doing so. But word of warning. It is a mature film. It deals with mature themes and has mature imagery.
Definitely, yes. And we've got also a great guest on that episode, so this is going to be a really fun deep dive, and I guess our first real Halloween episode.
Yeah, well, we're doing it in style, so your mission, should you choose to accept it, as I already said, folks, is to join us next week as we take a look at Possession. Join us on social media discreetly, of course, at Spyhards. That's SPYHARDS on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next week, folks, you know what they say about elephants and spies?